for coming today. We have an absolutely incredible panel, and I'm very excited to be here with you all. Um, we have Joshua Washington, who is the director of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, IBSI. He's also a fantastic musician and piano player, and if you're lucky, maybe you could sign your kids up to take some lessons with him. We have Kay Wilson here, who is part of Palestinian Media Watch. She is a British-born Israeli tour guide. She's an author, an award-winning author of this incredible book, The Rage Less Traveled. And she survived a terror attack. She's spoken to audiences all over the world. Absolutely powerful human rights activist, and definitely thank you for being here. Casa Paisley Harbor, she was born in Ethiopia. She immigrated to Israel. She's the Deputy Consul General at the Israeli Consulate in Miami. And previously she served as Deputy Head Mission at the Israel Embassy in Wellington, New Zealand. And in Myanmar?
Myanmar.
So, thank you. Thank you. Thank you again, everyone, for being here and everyone for being on the call. I definitely don't do you justice describing you. You're all incredible. So maybe take a moment and tell us about yourself. We could start with you, Casa.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much for hosting me. I'm really happy to be here with you all and to share my experience, to share the Israeli experience with you. A bit about myself. I was born in Ethiopia. I'm one of those Ethiopian Jews that we also known as Beta Israel. Also, common name is Palasha. I will tell more about it later on as I speak. I moved to Israel when I was 10 years old, grew up, studied, educated in Israel, and now I'm a diplomat. Yeah, thank you.
Joshua?
Thank you for having me, Cheryl. My name is Joshua Washington, direct the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, which is, we are a media library resource. So our primary focus is education. We partner with a lot of pro-Israel and Jewish organizations, and really anyone who will have us and give them this information, kind of unearthing some of these historical truths about the relationship between Jewish people and Black people here in this country, and also the Israel-Africa relationship. So that's our main focus. And we also, I mean, especially in this time now, with all of the kind of the rising tide of anti-Semitism that we're seeing all around, and particularly coming out of the Black community, we stand as a voice to combat some of those lies. So that's our main goal.
Thank you. Kay?
Just give everybody the bad news. But no, I'm Kay Wilson. I emigrated to Israel in 1986, before other panelists here were even born. And I used to be a tour guide in a previous world. And then 10 years ago, while I was guiding a Christian friend, two Palestinian terrorists attacked us with machetes and they murdered my friend. I was very, very gravely injured. Long recovery. And as Cheryl rightly said, although it was a bit of a fumbling ad for my book, but I've written a book about what happened and my things I've learned from the attack. And I am the liaison for Palestinian Media Watch, which is a charity, non-government organization that monitors anti-Semitism in the Palestinian Authority. I also play the piano. If we had more time, me and Josh could do a gig or something, you know, that would be a lot of fun.
That would be amazing.
But thank you for having me. It's really an honor. I wish I had a good enough eyesight to see who is writing what on the chat, but I can't see from here.
Well, you know, you've just given me an idea. We could have a Zionist Unite musical, and I'd love to have both of you come and play.
That would be
Sounds
great.
fun. Yeah.
That'd be fantastic.
So we're here basically because can we get the slides up? We're here because no, that is my
Your holiday pictures.
yes. Yeah. So yes, thank you to our sponsors. Without you promoting, we would definitely not have the word out as much as we have, and we're grateful that you all believe in this event and believe in the speakers and the cause. So we're here, as I was saying, because it seems like there is a lot of anti-Zionist, anti-Semitism seeping into, the Black Lives Matter movement, talk about Israel. This example is a day of New York City, day of action, and it says open to all except cops and Zionists. So clearly, it's not really open to all, and we've been singled out. The next picture would be great, if possible. The BLM in Palestine, connecting the struggles, live discussion. Now, these are only two of hundreds of things I've seen online, the email, where they're making this connection to Israel and the anti-Semitism. My question for all of you is, do you see this in Israel like we're seeing it here? If so, what do we do about this? Joshua, you could start.
In Israel, you said, or here in the U.S.?
Here in the U.S., your vision. And then Casa, I'd love you to talk more about Israel.
Sure. So absolutely. I mean, and I just wrote an article about this recently because there's always kind of been this attempt to, connect our the two people and their two struggles, the Black Americans and the Palestinian struggle. And though, I sympathize with the people, especially living in the Palestinian territories. There are some very, very huge differences. But the point of the hijacking of our narrative is to, get us to champion their cause. So no, I absolutely see it. Black and some of the Black Lives Matter demonstrations. You don't even see the majority of people aren't even Black sometimes in the group. Sometimes the leaders are Palestinian human rights leaders or Palestinian activists, because it's pretty well known that here in this country that if you can get the Black voice behind your cause, then it kind of adds more weight to your cause. It makes it more legitimate, and so we see that here. And there's no mention of how how the Palestinians are suffering under their own leadership, and how that's fostered this environment of just poverty and desperation and all those things, and just incentivizing terrorism. They're just things that us as a Black community have never done or resorted to doing, that that I think the Palestinian leaders encourage their people to do. But none of that gets talked about. You just they tell us that, for instance, with all the the talks about police brutality, they tell us that, well, that police officers train in Israel. Some of them get their training from police officers in Israel, and immediately a lot of us make that connection and already have this stance against Israel, when in reality, the truth is nowhere near. I mean, that is the truth, that they train in Israel, but they're not training to learn how to oppress people. Israel trains a lot of countries, and helps them with counterterrorism. And a lot of countries go to Israel, and the U.S. trains with a lot of different countries as well. So it's just a singling out of the Jewish people, but framing it in a way that gets us as Black Americans to connect emotionally with their cause and to champion it. So that's a lot here in this country, and it's getting more and more rampant now.
I think it's important to point out that the Black Lives Movement is definitely different than the platform itself. Some of the leaders of the platform, unfortunately, have made very direct, like anti-Semitic, anti-Israel remarks, and there has been information in, you know, one of the platform's charters, but that doesn't speak for all groups, obviously. And I just wanted to point that out because, you know, we can be silent, but that's not obviously going to help.
Right.
So speaking out together is very important, and calling out racism, anti-Semitism, and hate. I think that's, you know, something we all need to do. Kaza, do you see Black Lives Matters in Israel? How is it different there?
Well, first of all this issue, you know, when we talk about, you know, Israel and the Palestinians issue, people tend to forget that this is political issue, and this is something that can be solved in a peace negotiation. And Israel has been always extended her hands for peace in each opportunity. And let's not forget that the Palestinian side rejected every peace suggestion or opportunity, including the American peace plan that's currently on the table. The Palestinian obviously rejected it, while Israel embraced it and said yes. Israel always says to peace. So let's put it this way. It has nothing to do with race, and it has nothing to do with what they think they make of it. It's a political issue. And of course, for us, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, because Israel is the only Jewish state. It's always has been our home for centuries and ancient times. Given the fact that I'm an Ethiopian Jew, you know, also known as a Falasha, or we call ourselves Beta Israel. We are part of the 12 tribes that used to live in Israel, and it's just unfortunate to see the lack of knowledge and the ignorance. And I think I will very much connect with Joshua, the part of where we need more to educate people. I think the youngest people right now, the more they are exposed to the internet, the more they are the less they know, the less they understand, especially when it comes to conflicts in the Middle East. The Middle East is a very complicated region. And if you don't know the history, the connection and everything, it can be very confusing. It's not about, you know, it's not a black and white issue or thing. You have to learn the history. So being anti-Israel and basically or being anti-Zionist, it's being anti-Semite, and it's very ignorant about the Jewish history and the roots. The connection started from, you know, when we were slaves in Egypt, and we were free, and we went back home to Israel and the kingdom of David and Solomon, and even Ethiopia. If you if you want to learn about Africa and Ethiopia and Horn Africa, you can't learn about Ethiopian history without the connection to Israel, the history of Israel. So it's very, very important to emphasize that. You know, there are many groups in Israel, but I think the main issue is when we talk about, you know, social justice, it's not like in America. It's very different. It's very different. It's more, you know, a social issue, not political issue. So, yeah.
I'd like to say something, if possible, here.
Absolutely possible. Okay.
Yeah, I can't sit still for like too long, but no, what you have, listen, I mean, what Joshua started saying too, I want to give people the benefit of the doubt, right? I want to, even those posters you showed in the beginning, Black Lives Matter, Palestinian Lives Matter, I give people the benefit of the doubt, and they just want to do good. They're these social justice warriors. I don't know one of these people who've even been over to Israel, let alone into the areas of the Palestinian Authority. Now, I can say, Kaza also could probably say, although she's stationed in Miami, but I mix with Palestinians. I go there. I sit on some very nice leather sofas and I watch their cable TV. Then I go to other houses and it's like, you know, very sparse. And the streets are dirty in some places and the streets are very nice in other places. And they're 4x4 cars and some people ride bicycles. You see a diversity in Palestinian life that you see also in Israel or in the United States. So this idea that, first of all, it's not the Black Lives Matter identify with the Palestinian cause, so to speak. It's they don't even know what the cause is. They're speaking out of ignorance, okay? And in any society, you're going to get the rich and the poor. And that's not to whitewash issues we have with our neighbors and that we need to work, as Kaza so eloquently put it, towards a solution where both sides, so I don't know if that's ever going to happen. Now, the other last thing I want to say is, which Kaza touched on, about history. It's interesting that there's a meme going around. You know, this Facebook stuff, right? Memes, there's always inspirational quotes, right? So there's this quote which says, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. And everybody posts it. And yes, it speaks to our heart. But Kaza's absolutely right. People don't know history. They don't know the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or the Arab-Israeli conflict would be more accurate. And the other thing is regarding anti-Semitism, okay? If we take away the micro, Black Lives Matter, anti-Semitism, if we know history, anti-Semitism for 2,000 years is a virus that mutates itself as a response to different social situations. So if we know a little history, whether it would be with the you know, Christendom or under Islam or with the Enlightenment or with the revolution or whatever, or with Hitler, if we know anti-Semitism and how it's worked its way through history, this should come as no surprise. And these are also the kind of things that we need to be educating people on. What is the real state in the Palestinian Authority? And also, how does anti-Semitism weave itself and destroy and try and destroy the Jewish people? So this is nothing new. There's nothing new under the sun. This time it's simply black faces.
Well, it seems a little new to me when it comes to this, because there was a point, if we're talking about history, where Jews and Blacks marched together, right? Like there was no anti-Zionism. How did we end up getting here? I mean, Joshua, I know you've spoken a bit about this. Here.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I want to say something before that too. Is that, you know, there is, and I know that there is a distinction between the movement Black Lives Matter and the organization. But what I've been seeing in the conversations I've been having one-on-one with some of my peers and people who follow IBSI is that there's kind of this passive acceptance of some of the more overt anti-Semitism that they've been seeing. So, you know, it's not the majority of Black people that are perpetuating these Jewish conspiracies and you know, falsehoods, but a lot of us are looking at that and kind of going, oh, you know, that sounds right, you know, and moving on with our lives. And so there have been people I've been talking to, a lot of my, like I said, my Black peers, especially, messaging me or commenting saying, I had no idea about the stuff that you're posting. I had no idea about the, you know, the Jewish diaspora. I had no idea, you know, how problematic, you know, these things that this person said was, you know, until you really brought it to light for me. So there is that we just don't know. And I think that the enemies of the Jewish people capitalize on that. And really try to, it's like getting there first and getting us to ally with them first. So it's an uphill battle that we're fighting. But yeah, to answer your question, yes, you know, the Black Americans and Jewish people have always had this synergy. Our struggles have always been right next to each other. We've fought together. We've died together. We've uplifted our communities together. There's so much in our history. But there was something that Martin Luther King saw on the horizon, and he spoke to it at an assembly where he was. It was an assembly for conservative Judaism. He was talking to a rabbi who was asking questions, and one thing he said to the rabbi was, there are those of us, and by us he means Black people, who are kind of color consumed, and they see sort of a mystique in being colored, and anything non-colored is condemned. And he was about to make a statement about his support for Israel, but that statement before he said that was very interesting to me, because that's where we are now, is that he was explaining to the rabbi why there's a growing number of Black Americans who are standing against Israel and the Jewish people, why certain very very prominent civil rights organizations were starting to, or not even starting to, but made this kind of drastic switch, not just on Israel, but just very anti-Semitic and just Jew-hating statements and drawings and publications. And he was saying that it's because they, first of all, they don't know the history, but also they see everything as black and white. So Israel's white, um, and they're oppressing the brown Arabs, and that's it. And so they're being indoctrinated, or they're being easily drawn into this narrative. Um, and I think what we're seeing now is like Kay was saying, is the mutation of that. There's been, it's not a majority, but it's troubling because it's growing, and it's in, we're starting to see it now in more places of power, celebrities and people with large followings perpetuate and repost these things that aren't true. These, whether it's that, the real Jews are black, or whether it's, Israel commits genocide and it's apartheid state. They just it's getting a foothold, and I believe that is the main reason, is that we've compromised ourselves by adopting this more radical way of thinking about justice. We put it in terms of the color of our skin, which is a skewed way to administer justice. And when you look at justice that way, I think it's easy for anyone to manipulate you into whatever their cause is or whatever their agenda is, because they see that weak point there.
So, what do you say when you hear that Israel's white?
I was laughing when
I saw that.
Joshua was
Yeah.
speaking, because that's really, it's funny, but also so sad, because it shows the ignorance of people about Israel and Israelis and Jewish and who lives in Israel. What colors Jewish person? They are, it's like Kay said, they just, whatever they see on the media, whatever they told them, it's unfortunate. It's really unfortunate, because Israel is one of the most diverse country in the world, and you have Jews from diverse background and in a diverse color. It's unfortunate. It's a lot like, what am I white? So I'm a white promises or something? I don't think so. Last time I look at the mirror, I don't look like white.
No, you're not white, Cassie. You're not white.
You're not white.
It's a surprising surprising story also, because when like I said, if people will read more history, because you can't deny people's history, you can't deny people's identity, and saying that you're like this, you're like this. Okay, my community's history or story, it's very interesting, because after the destruction of the first temple, and after thousands of years of exile from Israel, and we ended up, after immigrating from one place to another, we end up in Ethiopia, but also the Ethiopia and Israel connection with King Solomon and Queen of Sheba, if you know that history as well. So we, the Falasha, the Ethiopian Jew, we thought that we are the only descendants that left from the people of Israel. To remind you, there were 12 tribes in Israel, okay? And we thought that we are the only one left, because we had no any connection with other Jewish community outside of Ethiopia. So for us to come to Israel, after many years of praying to go back to Jerusalem, which is Jerusalem, and to see white people that they also part of us, was a big surprise. So when we came to Israel, it was a mutual learning about, wow, they look so different than us, but they still celebrating following the tradition that we are following. So that was for me as a little kid, when I was 10 years old, when I arrived to Israel. It took me a while to understand that I'm still in Jerusalem, or in Jerusalem, because I never heard about white Jewish. So to say that Jewish people are only white, I mean, what does that put me. They are raising my history, my community. Again, I believe that there are a lot, there is so much to do in terms of education, because it doesn't matter what the outside of Israel people say about us or the way we look, because we know Israelis are very diverse. They have the Jews, the Muslims, the Arabs, the Israeli citizens, and among the Jewish community, it's very very diverse. After thousands of years of exile from Israel and from our homeland, and when we returned, we were surprised to find out about each other. So now I'll tell you one more story. Yom Kippur is the high holiday of, of the Jewish people all over the world. Okay, the high holiday. And also for us, in Ethiopia, we used to celebrate it a bit differently. Everyone was fasting. So I come in Israel, I live in a place that is really, really diverse. Like you have every community, and you have Jews, Arabs, Muslims, and Christians, and Jews from Yemen, Jews from India, from Ethiopia, you name it. So one of my favorite things to do on Yom Kippur is to do synagogue hop. So because each community has its own synagogue. The Ethiopians Jews, we have our own synagogue. The Indian Jews, they have own synagogue. The Yemenite, the Moroccan, each group has its own synagogue. So my favorite thing on Yom Kippur while I'm fasting is to walk, because you can't drive on Yom Kippur is to walk from one synagogue to another and to see how the Indian Jews, after the exile from Israel and living for thousands of years in that part of the world, how did they celebrate Yom Kippur? Of course, everyone is fasting. How do they pray? What they are wearing? For me, I took my little sister with me, and we did synagogue hop from the Indian synagogue to the Moroccan synagogue to Yemenite synagogue, all this kind of things, just to see how we were, we are different while we're celebrating the same holiday. So it couldn't be so saying that Israel it's just one color. it's it's unfortunate to hear that, because it couldn't be so far from the truth.
Absolutely. And Jews, of course, regardless of whether they're in Israel or anywhere else, are not just one color. So um, I couldn't agree with you more, being that I've been to Israel, and
Yeah.
I look forward to going back again. I failed to mention that Reverend Anthony Johnson unfortunately couldn't be with us today due to unforeseen circumstances. But he always says when we have discussions that Jews are people of color, all Jews. What do you think of that comment? That all Jews are people of color, and that we should not be seen as white or black. We're just all people of color. Anyone?
I don't know if I understand the question. I mean, we're all people of color. A white person is a
Okay.
person of color. But if you look at Jewish history, we all came from this land, and over the course of time intermingled, that kind of stuff. But I don't understand really what his comment means.
Well, I suppose it means that even though Jews are sometimes white passing, we are not white. As a people, we're Jews, and that excludes us from being, white or.
It's such a crazy world, The the jazz pianist Nat King Cole, who lived in the 1930s in America, he used to paint his face white. He used to whiten himself up so he'd be accepted by for his amazing abilities. And here we have 80 years later, people who are ostensibly white, we want to be black. It just doesn't make sense.
It's time we embrace who we are, regardless of color.
Well, Jewish history, we stemmed from the Holy Land. We came, as Casa said it so beautifully. We have a history here. We have it's not a narrative. I don't even like that word. Narrative implies it's like a made up story. We have a history. We can go, we have an archives. We have the Bible. We have testimony of non-Jewish people who testify to our presence here. So we've come from this part of the world. We're just going back to it.
Yeah, and I think it's to what Kay said. It's bigger than the narrative that almost like the Western narrative that we try to put on things in terms of black and white and whatever else, whatever lens that we see it with. It's so much broader. So some of these things that are even being debated right now in the Black community are not even, they're not even terms, they're not even things that if you were to ask an Israeli person or a Jewish person, it wouldn't even be something that they would understand. Like, I don't get it. What do you mean black, Jew, white? Like, no, I'm Jewish, they're Jewish. Like, that's just what it is. Casa was saying, just that very statement that you made, Casa, about going to the Indian synagogues and Yemenite synagogues and the Moroccan synagogues. There are some people now who may be listening going, I didn't even know they were Indian Jews. Like, you literally just blew my doors off by that one sentence. But that's, I think, why the work that all of us do is so important, because these are some things, especially for Israelis, that are just common knowledge, that if more of the world was aware of things like this, then it would just kind of dispel a lot of the lies that we're currently trying to fight right now.
Exactly. And I think we need to embrace each other and figure out how we maybe even in this climate, get back to, just embracing each other and realizing we need to be there for each other as we have been historically. And in many ways, we are, of course, still today. I mean, this program shows that, right? So we need to stand together because that's what makes us stronger. How would you suggest we do that? Do you have any, I mean, obviously, Joshua, I think your group speaks to that, and Atlanta Israel Coalition speaks to that. Any other things you've seen out there? Because there is the concern about, the Black Lives Matter movement again. Does it alienate Jews?
Right.
What do we do?
Are you asking me, or are you
Yes.
just so? So the first thing is that again, like I said, there is a distinction, but there is still a sort of mindset that is kind of primed to accept some of the negative things about Jewish people, or the negative lies, I should say, the lies about Jewish people, even amongst people who are more peaceful and passive and stuff. And so one of the things one of the things that I always say is that one of the biggest ways that Black people and Jewish people can come together, it doesn't necessarily have to be a, a movement that that Jewish people need to be a part of, or that Black people need to be a part of, but it really is, when it comes down to it, the best way to form those kind of alliances really is person to person. These relationships. I mean, just from some of the things that I've been talking about these past few weeks and posting, um, there have been friends of mine who've asked their Jewish friends questions that they were asked before, or made posts like, "Hey, you know what? I realize that maybe some of the things I've been posting may have been kind of problematic. So, my Jewish friends, can you help me, please? Like, what can you help me understand this and that?" And I think that is the best way, because there's more of I mean, it's just like going to Israel for yourself. It's like, you can learn these things and read these things, and it's beautiful. But when you go there and you see the diversity of Israel, and you see just the beauty and their faith, and how you see Jews of all colors, and you just look around, you make a personal connection to it, and that makes it harder for someone to come and try to shake you out of it. So yeah, I mean, for me, the best way, it really are forming and forging relationships through these things, asking questions, and then for us to continue to not be afraid to call out the BS, because even though it'll incur a lot, it may incur a lot of backlash. There are people who are watching, going, "Wow, I may not post, or may not comment anything or share anything, but I'm reading this and I'm watching, and it's interesting, and I want to know more, and you're making me dig deeper." And that's the people that we do it for.
Well said. There are a lot of comments in the chat. I just want to let our audience know, if you have questions, please ask in the Q&A, and we'll try to address them all. There's, as I said, many of them, but please keep politics out of this. Atlanta Israel Coalition believes that Israel is a human topic, racism is a human topic. We don't need to make it political. We're here together to work together, not divide. That said, let me get to one of our first comments, our first questions. How do we break down these barriers? I think we've touched upon that, but how do we break down these barriers and work together to make a difference? Casa, I mean, you're in Miami. Have you seen a lot of differences between Israel and now you're in Miami, working with Americans? How do you?
Well, we as a, and we are representative of the state of Israel here in Miami. My job is to work with everyone. We are working with everyone. We're sharing our knowledge, on Israeli high tech and Israeli innovations with everyone. We send Israel with everyone. So for us, our goal is as many people as possible to go to Israel, and also sharing knowledge and to strengthen the connection between, America and Israel here in many ways. But specifically here, the states that we are in charge here are Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, and Puerto Rico, and that's our focus. So for us, we working with everyone and in sharing knowledge, especially nowadays during COVID-19, on Israeli medical technologies and Israelis innovation and how Israel is actually contributing to the world in many ways. So this is our focus.
Okay, you were going to say something. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, just what Joshua was saying is about, it's also in response to the question asked about how do we get through this, and the idea of personal relationships, because there's very little unless we're an organization, all right? We just live in our family and our community. We're not going to like change the whole world, but we can allow our world to be changed. And just to illustrate something, I don't know if it's appropriate, but I remember when I was busy dying in the ambulance, I really had literally minutes to live. And I was being rushed to hospital. And in this tiny ambulance, the paramedic was a religious Jew, the big black bearded type that living in Tel Aviv for 25 years, I never went near. I mean, that hasn't been my community. And I was very aware, and this is why I don't know if it's appropriate. I'm just going too far with things. But I was very aware that life was being drained out of me. And I remember praying, it's funny when you're near death, how suddenly observant we all get. But I remember saying, God, just if my life, the rest of my life means I'm going to be in this ambulance with this religious gentleman, that's good enough for me. And then I was overcome with all this. I've missed out on talking to people. I've missed out on reaching to people who are different than me. And I think overshadowing this whole social crisis that people find themselves in, we also have to look at our own personal lives. All right, we must be aware in everything we do that we're here for a limited amount of time. We have an X amount of years. We don't know what the future is going to hold for any of us. And just to keep that intention, yes, to fight for the right things, but to understand that if we can actually end up depriving our own selves when we don't want to mix with a black person, or we don't want to mix with a white person, or we view everybody through a stereotype, and it's like life's too short. And this perpetual victimhood, that our groups have suffered more than this group, and it's like, that's not kind, helpful, noble, moral, or true. So I'm not really addressing the social crisis we're in, but just from a very, very personal experience, that we must hold also our general lives in tension with what's going on in the community and what we're here for, and how we can really get the best out of our lives and give to somebody else too.
That's very well said. That was beautiful and very appropriate.
For the first time in my life, I was appropriate.
So we're getting some questions. This one is for you, Joshua, from someone who states she's a teacher. He's a teacher. How do you think we could tackle effectively the racial issues in schools, primary, middle, and high schools in the U.S.?
The racial issues in school. So I think, so I need a little bit more specificity, but well, I'll say what I think they mean, I guess, unless they want to type some more. But one of the things that is very apparent in the public school system is that there's not a lot, especially in history classes, I'll say, there isn't a lot on Black history. I don't know if that's what she's talking about, or a lot on Jewish history. It's kind of like, you know, for African Americans, there's a page on slavery. I just remember this from high school. And if it wasn't, and I was mostly homeschooled growing up, but I went to a public school for high school, and I was very appreciative of my history teacher because he would always go off the textbook. I learned a lot of things, and I realized that what he was doing was actually not standard, but I really appreciated it. Because you open up the textbook, and the first thing you see about African Americans is the slave ships. You get like this aerial view of the slave ships, and then that's pretty much it until you get to the civil rights and learn about Martin Luther King, and then that's it. And so, you know, I think that one of the ways is that, you know, as it's, again, it's an individual thing that whether it's parents or other teachers, people with passions, educators, like myself and others, have to do the work to help fill in that gap. You know, because we can't wait for the schools to include that in. I mean, it's important, and it's important to advocate for, and it's important to make known. But in the meantime, our kids are still lacking, are getting a very thin education when it comes to particularly Black Americans and Jewish Americans, and then also their relationship to each other. So I think that, yeah, until we get that, we have to just take the initiative to teach our kids, to provide this extra education. You know, and I honestly, I always encourage, if you can, if you have the capacity to consider homeschooling, or at least additional schooling for your child at home, to make sure they get that, because it's important. And that's where that void is, where all the lies come in, that then comes and forms into hatred and stuff as they get older. So.
And I have to agree with you. You know, personally, I've experienced in myself, my son went to public school, and there was a Die Jew on the bathroom wall and Nazi drawings. When I called the vice principal and asked, you know, what are you doing about it? How can I help? This can't go on. She said, well, we just taught civil rights. And I said, well, it's wonderful that you're teaching civil rights, but are you teaching about the Holocaust? I know you made Night. It's no longer a mandatory book for them to read. And she said, well, it's optional now. Like, what 14-year-old's going to go, oh, I want to read Night. Yes.
Right.
So I offered to bring, you know, an educator in, or do something. We do send our kids to school. We need to see what they're learning. I mean, that's just a reality of it, whether they're homeschooled or not. You know, it's important for us to be involved, I believe.
Yeah, one of the things that I've seen, sorry, I don't mean to, can I say one more thing? That I've seen some parents say, because of the quarantine, is that they're actually thankful because they're actually seeing what their kids are learning in school. And some of them are choosing to homeschool or figure out other alternative ways to make sure they get the education that they need. I mean, California is adopting a lot of very anti-Israel curriculum in the school system now. So I mean, not only can we not wait for the school system, it's getting worse right now. And so we have to take it into our own hands, because someone is going to teach our kids. I mean, that's the thing, is that someone's going to teach them. And we have to be adamant about who does that and who doesn't. So.
Absolutely. So we have more questions. I am unfortunately having trouble seeing them all because again, they go between our chat and our Q&A. Again, if you're watching this and you have a question, please send it to the Q&A area. I'm seeing where people are from for some reason, but I'm not seeing their questions. Let's see.
I just want to say it's great to be here with Casa and Kay, by the way. I forgot to say that. But, you know, Casa and I just became friends, and Kay, we go kind of back, and it's just good to see your face. It's been a while.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to be included in that too, but okay.
Yeah.
Well, you, of course, you too, Cheryl. I meant like, you know,
I just have to, I want to really reconnect with what Joshua said about education. Education. Now, when it comes to education, um, it's not only, school, every moment, it's a moment of education. Every interaction it's education. What you're doing at home is education. I have a 3 years old boy, little boy, that everything that we do, he copies, he learns, and everything. So if some people knows, among the audience knows about Jewish people or Jewish tradition or history, what we do, it's not by saying things, but how we educate. It's mostly not by saying things. It's what you do, the example, the role models that you are, and what you do at home. That's education by doing it, not only verbally talk about it or tell the kid to read about it. So I think if you familiar with our, the Jewish education and history and tradition, you know that most of the education is through by doing. If every holiday is education, we have an on Passover, we doing the Seder, and showing them why are we doing this. It's because something happened. That's the way we teach history too, because we fasting, in a couple of weeks, in 2 weeks, we're going to have Tisha B'Av. It's the day that we are mourning the destruction of our temples more than 3,000 years ago. So for 3,000 years, we are fasting of something that happened 3,000 years ago. And the kids ask, why are you fasting? Because that happened, because the destruction of the temple. It's not only the destruction of the temple, it's the fact that our people were exiled for thousands of years, and we are longing to return to our home. So, so education is not only by reading in school. Education is every moment is at home. So this is the responsibility. When you talk about education, you are shaping the future leaders or the future, your future people. So what do you want to enrich them with? What do you want them to take with them along when they grow up and they have kids? And that's the human chain. And this is, when people ask, the survival of the Jewish people, yes, because this is our obligation. In the Torah, it says you have to educate your kids. Okay? You have to educate your kids. Education, it's your responsibility. Your children's education, it's your responsibility, not only the school. So therefore, educate yourself and then educate your kids. This is so important.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Okay, I got the questions going. This one, I believe, is for you, Casa.
Yeah.
I heard claims that Israel is euthanizing Ethiopians. What are the ways we could educate people when they make seemingly false claims like this about the Israeli government's action against minorities in Israel?
Well, everything that you see on the media on Israel, you need to ask questions, because we know that the media is biased. Now, when it comes to the Ethiopian Jews or my community, there are many things that I've done. There are mistakes. There are prejudiced people are everywhere, not only in Israel. And there are prejudiced Israelis. Racism is everywhere. Okay, so when it comes to community, you need to remember something very important. Now, we coming from a rural area. Okay, 90% of the Ethiopian Jews were coming from a village. So when I talk about villages in Ethiopia, where I grew up at, or where I was born at, it's a village with no electricity, no running water, no transportation, and really, like, we're farmers, and that's 90% of us. Okay, so when we came to Israel, we came to a modern modern country, a modern society with technologies, with many things. Now, there are many mistakes that have been done to help us to integrate in Israel. But that's mistakes I have learned, and generation like me, the youngest generation that educated and those kind of those kind of things, we tell Israel, the people of Israel, what we need in order to integrate. So my parents, they didn't know how to read and write. They didn't know Hebrew. They didn't know how to communicate. Okay. So what the state Israelis did is, there have been mistakes along the way. Obviously, of course, it's not something that happens, but also we learn from our mistakes. Okay. So when it comes to my community, there are two generations that we're dealing with: generation of the young generation and the generation of my parents that they don't even know how to read and write. They don't know the culture of Israel. They know how to deal with. For example, if I'm talking about myself, as the oldest child, I was in charge of the household. Okay, I was in charge of taking care of the family house, taking care of the banking, all the family errands. I was the one who's in charge of. Why? Because my parents didn't know how to speak in Hebrew and they didn't know how to do that. Even when it comes to education of my little siblings, I was in charge of my siblings' education. I'm the one who chose the school for my siblings. Okay, when we arrived to Israel, because my parents didn't know. At the same time, the state of Israel helped us a lot by giving us free education, healthcare, and the fact that I finished at Hebrew University my degree and my master at Tel Aviv University for free. And the state of Israel offering a lot to help my community. I'm not saying there are not mistakes. There are mistakes. It's natural. It happens. And if you don't do mistakes, you don't learn. And there are a lot of things that you see on the media about my communities, but we are learning. We're talking about that. In Israel, we love to talk about things, okay, about issues. If we're protesting, yes, because we want to make a better society. That's why we're protesting, and that's why we debate a lot. But it doesn't mean that we hate each other or the Ethiopian community is totally isolated. That's not the case, because my community, there are a lot of younger, enthusiastic, and educated people. We have judges, we have ministers, we have doctors, we have every Ethiopian, Israeli, everyone goes to the army and meet each other. The future, there is a great future to Israel, including my community. Yeah, that's a.
Thank you.
Hope that answers the question.
Absolutely.
I just think there's a lot in that question. Kessa answered it so beautifully, but like the question itself, I know whoever wrote it, they said it wasn't the person themselves was saying that Israel's committing genocide, but so let that be clear. But that's an enormous accusation, that word, and I mean, my first response, this is why I don't have Kassa's job, you see, in diplomacy. It would be like, how dare you? I mean, really, that's how far things have come, that people think that my people, that we are committing genocide against our own people, committing genocide against anybody. But that question is so loaded. I think, look, Kassa lives in America. You guys live in America. I don't know how many other people are watching it. I think when you live in Israel, and Kassa, I'm sure you can back me up on this, there's a disconnect with really the vehemence that there is in the United States at the moment. I can't understand emotionally what's going on. It's beyond me that people are throwing charges of genocide out. Sorry, I just had to interject that because it's really shocking to hear it.
Oh, it's a fantastic point. And unfortunately, we see this all the time. That's actually a reason we started the Atlanta Israel Coalition, because it's just getting worse. We have to stand together. That leads me to the next question, which I think, Joshua, it's for you. Why would any platform like BLM or NAACP support the BDS movement. Why is that even involved when this is supposed to be a domestic agenda?
Sure. That's the question I had. I mean, at the very beginning of Black Lives Matter, 20, I think it was 2013. Um, the Women's March, same thing. It was their platform started off being as a very singular platform, here in this country, a specific issue, and it almost overnight it seemed like they were chanting "Free Palestine," um, and this is what um, you know. It's because so in the 60s when the Black Civil Rights Organization Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was had kind of turned anti-Israel. Um, since then, I think that Israel's enemies kind of see this as a strategy that works, and so any movement that rises up, any kind of social justice movement, um, it's not, like I said before, it's not even really a it doesn't take that much work to actually get that movement on your team, to hijack that movement, because um, and part of it is, and kind of like what Kay was saying, part of it is a lot of like victimhood stuff, and so it's misery loves company. I mean, it really is what it is. And the part of the reason why the movement for Black Lives has adopted this very global and divisive and animist stance toward Israel is because, well, one, as a movement, when you're not focused on what your movement is supposed to be, you try to find stuff. I mean, that was a problem with SNCC back then. Was the new president decided that they wanted to take a more global stance. They didn't want to just focus on combating discrimination in the U.S. They wanted to right the wrongs of the whole world. Well, as noble as that sounds, it's just not possible. You can't. Everyone's here for a purpose. Everyone's here for a reason. And so that kind of opened them up to all kinds of stuff. And some of the members in the group were already close with the Nation of Islam and close friends with other Palestinian students and all these things. And so it kind of just took them in that direction, which, that eventually when you lead by your feelings that way, you kind of go by what your friends say and or what feels good to you. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of why is that these movements that come up, they kind of seek to clean up the whole world, and I mean, so really it's almost not a game, I want to say, but it's almost this thing of, okay, who can get to them first with their cause and get them on their side. So yeah, I mean, unfortunately, at the top of the organization, the Black Lives Matter leaders are very specific about where they stand with Israel and the Jewish people, and a lot of other platforms that they've taken that are very problematic to me, and I think to the Black community in general. But yeah, I mean, I think that's what happens when you have that kind of mindset, both the victimhood mentality and the I want to clean up the whole world kind of thing. You're susceptible to any narrative that comes to you. You'll do it if it feels good. So.
Yeah, and I think it's been very popular to call these different movements and the Palestinian from the river to the sea, Palestine should be free, which is really a calling to eliminate Israel. I mean, people say it and they may not even know what it means. Yep. It's very popular to call it the intersectionality of these groups.
And that's what I mean by it lends itself, that kind of thinking lends itself to eventually becoming anti-Jewish, because it usually puts Jewish people at the top of that. And they say, okay, well, they're the problem. They're the reason for all these things. And some of the Black Lives Matter leaders in the movement who've been organizing some of the protests have voiced very strong support for, Louis Farrakhan and Nation of Islam. And like I said, even though all their followers may not agree with them, it's because of that hierarchy of justice, that the way that they view how justice is supposed to work in their minds, it kind of like, it's inevitable that they would go to, okay, well, I guess it's all Israel's fault. I guess that's what we're getting at here. And that's kind of, so the heart of that, I think, is what needs to change. the view of justice, without any other word before it, but just justice and what that really means, would eradicate some of that.
Well, we are just about out of time, and we have so many different questions. I want to thank our sponsors again, our partners, and I want to thank you all for being here. If you're watching and you have more questions, by all means, message us at Atlanta Israel Coalition on our Facebook page, and I will personally try to get the answers for you. Thank you again, Joshua, Kay, and Casa, for being here. And I hope we can continue this conversation. I think it's a very important one.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Good seeing y'all.
It's nice to read the comments. Thank you for taking part, everybody.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.